Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our group learning program, and we're in Chapter 5 of this book, Developing a Life Practice, the Path that Leads to Enlightenment. We're studying the Eightfold Path, the path for all humans to enlightenment. This is where you're going to learn the detailed teachings of what leads to enlightenment. This is the complete elimination of discontentedness. Last week, we discussed the Four Noble Truths, which describes the problem, the cause of the problem, the elimination, and the path forward. And that path forward was the Eightfold Path. That's what eliminates all discontentedness in the mind, bringing it to peace, calm, serenity, and contentedness with joy, so that the mind and your life can be peaceful and joyful. You can have professional and personal relationships that blossom. You can have focus, concentration, clarity of mind, and deep memory as the mind moves closer and closer to this enlightened mental state. So I'd like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining us for the first time or you've been joining us regularly. You can ask questions as we go in our class today by putting that into YouTube or into Zoom. Today, Facebook isn't working. Unfortunately, we're not able to live stream there, some impermanence there, but anybody who typically joins through Facebook, they have the ability to join through YouTube and coming into Zoom as well. So as we go, I will open up to any questions that you guys have. We're going to start off with just discussing the natural law of karma and helping you guys to understand how this path is laid out and why it's laid out that way. To understand the path to enlightenment, it's important to understand what the Buddha did during his lifetime. He shared these teachings, and the Eightfold Path was the core central teaching, and all the other teachings plug into it. And what he's exposing you to is the natural laws of existence, namely the natural law of karma. He made his way to this enlightened mental state through his own independent journey, discovering and figuring out what it takes in order to move the mind to this enlightened mental state where it's peaceful and joyful permanently, no longer experiencing any discontent feelings. And then what he did during his life is he made himself available to all those who have a sincere interest in attaining that same mental state through training the mind. He provided guidance. He didn't provide rules or commandments, or he didn't use guilt, shame, or fear in order to convince people to learn his teachings. Instead, he provided these teachings that you could learn, and then as you learn them, you reflect on them to independently verify them, and then you practice them to train the mind and eliminate the pollutions of mind. And as you're doing this, you can see the truth for yourself, that the teachings can be independently verified, and that as you eliminate this pollution from the mind, that your mind becomes more peaceful and more joyful. The discontentedness gradually diminishes. So he's exposing you to this natural law of karma, of cause and effect, or action and result, the results of your decisions. The natural law of karma, it isn't a punishment and reward. It's not a mystical, magical thing. Some people refer to it as karma, which is the Sanskrit version of this word. The Pali version, which the original teachings of the Buddha are in Pali, it's written as Gama. So people who study the original teachings of the Buddha will tend to use this word Gama. It's just cause and effect, or action and result. It's a sequence of events that lead to some outcome. It's the results of your decisions. So for example, if you're polite, kind, friendly, and respectful, people tend to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful to you. where if you have relationships where you're impolite, unkind, unfriendly, and disrespectful, then those people tend to be that way with you. This is the natural law of karma. It's the results of your decisions. Everything that you've learned in life has been this gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. And that's what you would ultimately need to do in order to progress to enlightenment, is have this gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. One of the biggest myths in the Buddhist community is that the Buddha sat under a tree, he meditated, and then instantly got to enlightenment. But if you learn in his teachings, he shares that this isn't what occurred. He didn't attain enlightenment instantaneously. It was gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. And it's the Eightfold Path that is that gradual training that one needs to understand and then gradually implement that into their life by developing this life practice. And that's where you see the results. So your life practice is the Eightfold Path. The title of this book that we're using for this program is Developing a Life Practice, the Path That Leads to Enlightenment. The Eightfold Path is that path. So as we talk in today's class, I'm going to be sharing with you all the various facets of the Eightfold Path. We're going to go step by step using the words of the Buddha and helping you to understand what did he actually teach related to this Eightfold Path. Last week, we covered right view, which is learning the three universal truths and the Four Noble Truths. Namely, right view is the Four Noble Truths, but you need to know the three universal truths in order to understand the Four Noble Truths. So if you already attended that class, today I'm going to share a little bit of a recap just to help you remember what we talked about last week. And then for those of you guys that weren't in class last week, I suggest that you go back and watch the replay, but the recap that I'm going to give today will also help you as well. Then we're going to move into understanding right intention. Again, using the words of the Buddha. We're going to be discussing right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, exploring the words of the Buddha, because it's the words of the Buddha that explains what did he do in order to attain enlightenment. If you're looking to attain enlightenment with the teachings of the Buddha, you wouldn't be interested in learning with anything else but the words of the Buddha, because anything that's just been handed down from person to person to person and that's been modified or changed since his lifetime, this is just making the path more murky and more gray. But by going back to the original source teachings of the Buddha, who is the discoverer, the declarer, the originator of the path to enlightenment, you can see what did he teach and what he didn't teach. And then you don't believe his teachings. You learn, reflect, and practice. And you've essentially been doing the same thing throughout your whole life, with whether it's learning how to speak English or any type of skill or ability that you have. You've been gradually learning those things. You've been gradually practicing, and you've gradually seen this progress. And you're doing the same thing with the natural laws of existence and this natural law of karma as you're progressing forward on the path to enlightenment. You're gradually learning, gradually practicing, and gradually experiencing this progress. And you did the same thing with the natural law of gravity as you were growing up as a child. As a child, we all struggled with this natural law of gravity. We made lots of unwise decisions and we experienced unwholesome results because we didn't have the wisdom of this natural law of gravity. We fell down, we hit our head, we hit our knees, our elbows, we knocked over drinks and broke glasses, and we broke our toys. But slowly but surely, we gained the wisdom of this natural law of gravity, and we started making wiser decisions, which led to more wholesome outcomes. To the point now where we learned how to ride a bicycle, we can climb a ladder, we can probably fly all over the world on airplanes because we understand this natural law of gravity now. With that wisdom, we make wiser decisions that lead to wholesome outcomes. When we lack the wisdom of this natural law of gravity, which took us probably 10, 12 years to really understand and master, when we lacked that wisdom, we made unwise decisions and it produced unwholesome results. So now what you're doing is, on this path to enlightenment, you're looking to gain wisdom of these natural laws of existence, because everybody is affected by these natural laws, whether we're aware of them or not. And the more wisdom we have of these natural laws, we will make wiser decisions about what we choose to do, and therefore we will experience wholesome outcomes. And part of this is training the mind. So the Buddha is going to provide you in the Eightfold Path a certain amount of wisdom. He's going to provide you moral conduct, and he's going to provide you this mental discipline in which to train the mind. And it's really important when we talk about the moral conduct that you don't think about it as as rules or commandments or anything like that. Because as long as we're causing harm through our moral conduct, that harm is going to come back to us. So the Buddha shared the moral conduct as a way to help you understand this guidance of the natural law of karma, of cause and effect, so that by you making wiser decisions around your moral conduct, you will see the results for yourself, that your personal and professional relationships will blossom. And your mind can be more peaceful and joyful because you know that you're functioning in a way that is wise and wholesome, and you're not causing harm to others. So I'm going to go piece by piece in helping you to understand each factor of this path, allowing you to ask questions at different times so that you can be sure that you understand this and get clarity where you need help in understanding any aspect of the path. This first factor, or this first step on the path, is called right view. By understanding right view, you can have this breakthrough to understanding the problem, the cause, the elimination, and the path forward, which you would need to know in order to get to enlightenment. The path to enlightenment is to eliminate discontent feelings, but you wouldn't be able to eliminate them if you didn't know what the cause was and what the elimination was. So here in the Eightfold Path, using the words of the Buddha, he shares, "In what, monks, is right view? It is, monks, the wisdom of discontentedness, the wisdom of the cause of discontentedness, the wisdom of the elimination of discontentedness, and the wisdom of the way of practice leading to the elimination of discontentedness. This is called right view." So here what he's doing is he's just pointing to the Four Noble Truths, and he's saying that is right view, because he already discussed the Four Noble Truths in other teachings. So here with the Eightfold Path, it's a core central teaching that consolidates a lot of teachings all into one core central teaching with other teachings plugging into it. So here he's pointing to the Four Noble Truths and saying that is right view. And then underneath of this line that you see drawn on the visual aid is I put the top section of the Four Noble Truths. Below this, the Buddha goes into detail about what the Four Noble Truths are. I just put this here to build your confidence that the right view in the Eightfold Path is pointing to the Four Noble Truths, and then I will explain to you the Four Noble Truths. But in order to understand the Four Noble Truths, you need to understand the three universal truths. And this is what I discussed last week as part of chapter 4, the Four Noble Truths establishing right view. And this is where I would suggest that an individual who hasn't learned this with me yet go back to those recordings and be sure that you learn that. Because here I'll just give you a little bit of a brief overview. Because remember, you would like to learn, reflect, and practice to independently verify this. So as I go through this, I won't have time to go through all the details that I went through last week, but at least I can give you a refresher and maybe kind of help some of those people who weren't in class last week. Because the universal truth of impermanence is the very first thing that you should learn as part of your journey to enlightenment. Without understanding this, you wouldn't be able to ever make any real progress on the path to enlightenment. The universal truth of impermanence is helping you to understand conditioned objects, that they arise, they change, and they fade away. What a conditioned object is essentially all the material objects around you, all the different things that you see around you, whether it's your own body, whether it's your relationships, whether it's your job, your income, your salary, your bank account, your clothing, everything, essentially your car, all of these possessions, all of these material objects, they're all impermanent. They arose, they change, and they fade away. So for example, like a cell phone, at one time, that was a bunch of bits and pieces and parts, but it was put together and arose as a cell phone. And then it changes, it slows down, it gets scratches, it gets cracks on the screen, it gets smudges and things like this. And then eventually it'll fade away and it will no longer exist as a mobile phone. So this is the universal truth of impermanence, and you need to independently verify this by going out into the world and seeing when you walk down the sidewalk, there's a crack. That's impermanence. You see a tree growing, the leaves come in and then the leaves fall. This is impermanence. It's sunny out, then it rains, then it snows, then it's windy, then it sleets or something else. This is all impermanence. So things are constantly changing. There are a few things which are called unconditioned objects that don't arise, they don't change, and they don't fade away. Enlightenment itself is this way. the natural laws of existence, which the Buddha taught, are this way. So that's why his teachings that he taught 2,500 years ago are just as applicable today as they were 2,500 years ago, because these natural laws haven't changed. So what he described as these natural laws 2,500 years ago apply to today as well. And unconditional love doesn't arise, it doesn't change, and it doesn't fade away. Once the unconditional love is established, it's always going to be there. That someone doesn't have to earn your love, so therefore you can't fall out of love with them. So if you think about your parents perhaps, or children, or people like this, you might be understanding what unconditional love is. But we're going to be discussing unconditional love as part of chapter 15. So here, just understand the universal truth of impermanence is describing things that arise, they change, and they fade away. Then there's the universal truth of discontentedness. This is where the Buddha is explaining the unenlightened mind, that it has three feelings. These are conditioned feelings, meaning that the mind bases its inner feelings on some condition. There's pleasant feelings, which is happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria, etc., all those different types of pleasant feelings. Then there's painful feelings like sadness, anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety. These are very painful for the mind to experience. Then there's things that are neither painful nor pleasant. For me, I put boredom and loneliness in there. Some people tell me it's quite painful for them. So you could put that into the painful category if you like. But if you think about shyness, shyness isn't painful and it's not pleasant. It's neither painful nor pleasant. It's kind of like if somebody came and sat next to you really closely, you didn't know this person, and their body was touching your body. You would probably say that this isn't painful, it's not pleasant. The mind is kind of uncomfortable in that situation. So that's what the neither painful nor pleasant is. It's kind of uncomfortable or unsatisfied. And now you can understand what these three feelings are. Pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. And these are conditioned feelings. The unenlightened mind is basing its inner feelings on some condition. That if you get what you want, then the mind experiences pleasant feelings like happiness, excitement, elation. But if the mind doesn't get what it wants, then it experiences these painful feelings. And this is the mind going up and down and up and down. And these feelings are temporary. They arise, they change, and they fade away. So ultimately, those pleasant feelings that are conditioned pleasant feelings are unsatisfying because they're only temporary. The enlightened mind no longer bases its inner feelings on some impermanent condition. Therefore, the mind is beyond pleasure and pain. It no longer experiences this up and down and up and down. The mind is just always joyful. The mind is always peaceful. You could think about the enlightened mind as unconditioned happiness, for example. This will help you to understand how the enlightened mind doesn't have the conditions that the unenlightened mind has. The unenlightened mind has certain conditions that are causing it to be shaken up, unsteady, and uncalm. But through the path to enlightenment, the Eightfold Path, you've purified the mind. It no longer has those conditions, so therefore it never gets shaken up or unsteady or uncalm because the mind is now unconditioned. With a conditioned feeling, it arises, it changes, and it fades away. An unconditioned mental state, it doesn't arise, it doesn't change, and it doesn't fade away, so the enlightened mental state is permanent. This is explaining the discontentedness, this universal truth of discontentedness. And what you can do here to independently verify this is look at your own mind and your own experiences over the course of your life and see that all the different feelings that you've experienced are within these three categories. And you can map all those feelings into these three categories, giving you the confidence that the Buddha is explaining to you what the unenlightened mind experiences. Then there's the universal truth of non-self. This is the solution to eliminating one of the pollutions that the Buddha discovered. The pollution in the mind is personal existence view. This is where the mind falsely believes, mistakenly understands, and has the misperception that this body and or this mind is who you are as a person. That you think that this body, this self-image is you. And then when the mind hears agreeable contact related to the self-image, then the mind experiences pleasant feelings. So if somebody says, "Oh, you're so handsome," or "You're so beautiful," perhaps you get pleasant feelings. But then because of impermanence, it's only a matter of time before somebody says something degrading or disparaging about your self-image. And now the mind experiences painful feelings like sadness, anger, frustration, or others. So as long as the mind is clinging with this personal existence view to the self-image or the self-identity in the mind, the self-identity and the self-image is what's called the personal existence view. And if the mind's clinging to this, when you hear agreeable contact, then you're going to get pleasant feelings. And you hear disagreeable contact, you're going to get painful feelings. So the universal truth of non-self is helping you to realize that this body nor this mind is you. And when you understand that and you can see the truth in that, and then you train your mind to understand that and practice that in daily life, then no matter what somebody says, you can reside peaceful and joyful. You might still choose to not be around certain people who are degrading and disparaging because it would be unwise to be around that regularly. But nonetheless, when you hear that, if you've eliminated personal existence view, you could no longer experience discontentedness related to the self-image or self-identity. So I went through each of these and I described them in a lot more detail than I have time to discuss today. So let me see if there's any questions on these three before we move into the next part of what I'm going to share with you related to right view. You can put those into YouTube and or Zoom, and in the comment section I'll be able to see that. Or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions if you have questions related to any of these. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions related to any of these. I don't see any questions at all. So let's go ahead and move into the next part, which is understanding the definition of craving, desire, attachment. Craving, desire, attachment are words that we use in common language. But with Buddhist teachings, we use them in different ways. And it's important to understand how we use these words because it will help you to understand the Four Noble Truths. A craving, desire, attachment, or expectations, wants, holding, grasping, clinging. This is described as a mental longing for something with a strong eagerness. The mind is pulling in the direction of the objects of its affection. Essentially, the unenlightened mind thinks that the next new shiny object around the corner is going to provide some kind of lasting satisfaction. So the mind chases after it, chases and chases and chases. And when it gets what it wants, it's going to experience those pleasant feelings. And when it doesn't get it, it's going to experience those painful feelings that we're going to talk about as part of the Four Noble Truths. So if you've ever been shopping somewhere and you saw a brand new pair of shoes and you were like, oh my goodness, I gotta have those new pair of shoes, and you just chased and chased and chased and you wanted them really bad, that's the craving, desire, attachment. Or if you saw some new technology like a new phone or a new TV or something like this, and the same thing, the mind was chasing, thinking that this next new shiny object around the corner was going to provide some kind of lasting satisfaction. Then you experience craving, desire, attachment. You might know what I'm describing here. If you aren't familiar with this, you should ask a question and be sure you get clarity on what a craving, desire, attachment is, because you've experienced these in life for sure. Your mind may be aware of those now that I'm describing it, and it may not. So you need to be able to see what a craving, desire, attachment is, where the mind is almost pulling towards something. Or some people say it feels like they're being pushed towards a certain object. And this is the mind just chasing and chasing and chasing. So this is a fundamental building block to understand in order to understand the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths is to understand that the first noble truth is explaining the problem. The problem is that everyone that is unenlightened will experience discontentedness. You'll experience those conditioned pleasant feelings, those conditioned painful feelings, and the feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. The mind will go up and down and up and down. There'll be periods of steadiness or peacefulness or joy here and there, but it's only a matter of time before the mind's right back into these conditioned feelings. And then the second noble truth is describing that discontentedness is caused by our own cravings, desires, attachments, because the mind wants everything to be permanent when everything in the world is impermanent. Now, I will describe that a few times and then give you an example to help you understand. Discontentedness, those conditioned pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant, is caused by our own cravings, desires, attachments, that mental longing with a strong eagerness, because the mind wants everything to be permanent when everything in the world is impermanent. So the mind is craving permanence, but yet it's living in this impermanent world. Another way to say this is not only is the mind craving permanence, but it does not like impermanence. The mind does not like change. When things starts changing, the unenlightened mind doesn't like this. And where you can see this, that's something that you can relate to, is if you've ever been in a relationship with a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or a husband or wife, and you observe that when you guys first got together, there were certain pleasant feelings. There was this happiness, excitement, elation, or thrill, euphoria, because there's somebody that's taking an interest in you. You perhaps were invited to the movies or to dinner, or they were calling you or sending you a text message, checking in on you, seeing how you were doing. And because there's this craving for affection, when this happened, and as this was happening, the mind got these pleasant feelings. And now, as time went on in the relationship, and the relationship was over, then that's where the sadness or the frustration or the anger, irritation came in, because the mind didn't understand that this relationship was impermanent. It was always impermanent. Even if you guys spent the rest of your lives together, more likely than not, one of you guys would have died first. And even if you guys died at the same time, the relationship is still impermanent, because you would have ended up ending that relationship at death. But the mind is craving permanence. It wants this relationship to be permanent. So when the unenlightened mind experiences this impermanence, it doesn't understand the universal truth of impermanence. So therefore, it experiences these painful feelings. And then what the mind tends to do is it pushes this person away, or it pushes this situation away. Or in some situations where it doesn't get what it wants, it might become bitter and harsh and aggressive and hostile, and a person chooses to leave out of your life. So as long as there's this craving, desire, attachment in the mind where it's longing and yearning, wanting the objects of its affection, it's going to experience these conditioned pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant. The reason why one's mind grieves at a funeral is because the mind has now experienced impermanence. If you have somebody that was been close to you that has died or passed away and you grieved, you're not a bad person that that's occurred, but instead the mind experienced this impermanence that it didn't understand and it didn't like. And because of that, there was this grief or this sadness that came into the mind at the time of the funeral. The same reason why the mind is grieving at a funeral is the same reason why it might experience sadness or be upset at a wedding, for example. If brother or sister gets married and mom and dad and grandma and grandpa are there, brothers and sisters, people might be crying at a wedding because the mind is craving permanence, wanting this person to be permanent. But when they go off into the world, this represents impermanence to the mind. And same thing when somebody goes off to college. Sometimes parents can be upset and they can be sad, or they can grieve when their child goes away because they're craving permanence. So it's the mental longing and strong eagerness that is causing the mind to be discontent. And you can see this to be true because you can reflect and look over all your past experiences where your mind has been discontent, and you can see that the mind is causing this itself. Essentially, that's what the second noble truth is explaining, is that you're causing all your discontent feelings yourself. The mind's mental longing and strong eagerness is causing this. But unfortunately, because of wrong view, the unenlightened mind will tend to blame other people for your discontent feelings. And then with wrong view, we think that the other person is causing our feelings. So we tend to push them away, or we become bitter and harsh or aggressive, unskillful in our moral conduct. And then that person chooses to go away. Or the other thing that can happen is because the mind is craving for things to be a certain way, you might try to control a person or put your expectations on somebody and try to get them to do the things that you want. Because the unenlightened mind thinks if you can just get everybody to do things your way, life would be perfect. But the problem is there's 8 billion people in the world, and you can't train 8 billion people to do things your way. So therefore, as long as there's this craving, desire, attachment in the mind, and you're pushing people away, you're becoming unskillful in your moral conduct, you might be trying to put your expectations or controlling people, you can't live harmoniously with all people. There's only a smaller and smaller and smaller group of people that you can spend time with as your expectations grow of what you want from somebody. And now this group of people gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and you could feel quite isolated. But when you get to the third noble truth and you eliminate the discontentedness by eliminating cravings, desires, attachments, now you can open up and your relationships can blossom because you're no longer pushing people away. You're no longer being bitter and harsh and aggressive to people. And you're no longer putting your expectations and your wants on other people, trying to control them to do the things that you want. So you can eliminate the discontentedness by eliminating craving, desire, attachment. And that's what this whole path is about, among other things, is to eliminate the cravings, desires, attachments through training the mind so that the mind is no longer having this longing and yearning. And the way that you do that is through the fourth noble truth. The path to eliminating discontentedness is the Eightfold Path. And that's why we're going to spend the rest of our class today going into detail about the Eightfold Path and understanding each individual step. Let me pause and see if there's any questions here based on this little recap that I just gave you. Again, you can put that into YouTube or into Zoom. You can also raise your hand electronically in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. We have a question here on YouTube. The question is Gotama permanent or impermanent? It follows you in life. Every rebirth is based on what you did in the last life, and your Gotama follows, so is that permanent? Your Gotama is not permanent. You will experience the results of your decisions. So when you make a certain decision, you're going to experience a certain either wholesome result based on a wise decision, or you're going to experience an unwholesome result based on an unwise decision. But you can extinguish this unwholesome Gotama through making wise decisions. In your wise decisions, these are going to be experienced, and then you're going to move on. We're going to be describing Gotama in chapter 9, and I'm going to be discussing it as part of our class, where we're going to go into a lot of detail about each individual facet of the natural law of Gotama, but it's not permanent. Let's see. We don't have any questions in Zoom, so let's move on to understanding right intention. Right intention is the second step on the Eightfold Path. This is where you're rounding out the wisdom section of the Eightfold Path. So let's use the words of the Buddha to understand this, because he's the discoverer, the declarer, the originator of the path, and then I'll help you to understand each aspect of right intention. He says, in what, monks, is right intention? The intention of renunciation, the intention of non-ill will, the intention of harmlessness. This, monks, is called right intention. So there's these three facets, or these three aspects of right intention: renunciation, non-ill will, and harmlessness. What renunciation is all about is having an interest or willingness to let go and give up unwholesomeness, letting go of the mind's false beliefs and false perceptions of reality. One of the very first things that the mind needs to be willing to let go of, that is a false belief or false perception of reality, is that other people are causing you to be angry, or other people are causing you to be irritated. The mind needs to be able to see deeply that other people aren't causing your mind to be discontent, that your mind's craving, desire, attachment is causing that. And where you're having challenges to see that, that's where you'd like to reach out to your teacher and get help. Either post a message in the Facebook group, ask a question in class, you can send a private message, or schedule a personal guidance session, because just like you need to build up your meditation practice with the guidance of a teacher, you're going to need to build up your ability to see your own cravings, desires, attachments. Because as long as the mind thinks or believes or has the false perception that other people are causing you to be angry, why would you ever train your own mind? Why would you ever do this work if it's other people that are causing the difficulties and challenges in your life? It's your own mind that's causing these things. So you'll need to practice renunciation, where you have the intention or the thinking or the thought that you're willing to let go. But you're not just letting go of things with blind belief. You're learning, you're reflecting to independently verify the teachings. And as you see the wisdom and you're practicing more and more, then your mind has more and more willingness to let go, because you see the truth for yourself. So this right intention or right thinking or right thought, it starts with this renunciation, because as long as your mind's holding on to its false beliefs and false perceptions, then you're going to continue to struggle and have difficulties in the world. The whole reason why the mind is experiencing discontentedness is because of this craving, desire, attachment. But craving, desire, attachment is in the mind because of what we call the unknowing of true reality. Some people call it ignorance or confusion or misunderstanding. And these misunderstandings are causing the mind to continue to experience this continuous cycle of discontent feelings. And until the mind cultivates the wisdom that it needs, it will continue to struggle and have these difficulties. So if you just hold on to what you currently believe, then your mind isn't going to be able to acquire wisdom to now eliminate your false beliefs, opinions, and views and bring in this wisdom. So your mind's going to need to be willing to let go. And this is what we call renunciation. Then there is the intention of non-ill will. This is the same as saying goodwill, because non-ill will means goodwill. It's a double negative. What goodwill is loving kindness. If you have the intention of ill will, then the mind has animosity or bitterness. It has anger, hatred, or these lesser versions. But what you're interested in cultivating in the mind is loving kindness, this genuine interest in seeing all beings be well, where you're interested in seeing other beings experience wholesome things in the world. Because as long as you have ill will in the mind, this is going to hinder you from being able to experience harmonious relationships. So you need to develop this intention of goodwill in the mind, or loving kindness. Then you need to have the intention of harmlessness, where the mind is not causing or incapable or uninterested in causing harm to others. Because as long as you're interested in causing harm to others and you cause harm, then that harm is going to come back to you. Because after this, we're going to move into the moral conduct section. So you would need to understand that you need to improve your moral conduct through wisdom, so that you're not causing harm through your speech or actions in your livelihood. And by setting that intention and cultivating that intention of harmlessness, where you're disinterested in causing harm to others, you can then build out the rest of the Eightfold Path with your moral conduct. This wisdom section of the Eightfold Path is helping you to see through the Four Noble Truths that you need to be able to accept responsibility for your own feelings, your intentions, your speech, and your actions. It's only your decisions that are creating these, either your feelings or your intentions or your speech or your actions. And the more you investigate this, the more you reflect on it, and the more you practice, you can see this to be true. And by accepting responsibility for your own discontent mind, this is very empowering, because if your mind is causing these discontent feelings, that means that you can solve them, you can resolve them. But as long as the mind keeps pushing people out of your life, or you become bitter and harsh and people choose to leave your life, or you put these expectations on people and they choose to leave your life, as long as that's going on, you're not going to be able to solve the problem, because pushing people out of your life hasn't solved the problem. The mind just keeps getting frustrated or irritated or annoyed over and over and over again. And that's why that keeps happening, because the mind has this false belief thinking that the problem is other people. And when you push those people out of your life, either overtly or through your unskillful conduct, then that's why the mind keeps experiencing discontentedness over and over again. But when you understand what the real problem is, which is the Four Noble Truths is explaining it to you, and you understand the solution, this is why you can get real results with the teachings of the Buddha, because you're addressing the true problem. And that starts with taking responsibility for your own feelings, which means you don't have to go out into the world and train 8 billion people to do things your way. You can just train one mind. Right intention is that intention of renunciation, non-ill will or loving kindness, and harmlessness. So this is the wisdom section of the Eightfold Path. Let me see what questions you guys might have about this. Remember, you can put that into YouTube or into Zoom, and I'll be able to see that and then be able to answer your question as we go in the class. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere in our YouTube or in Zoom. So let's move on to the next section, which is right speech. During the lifetime of the Buddha, all there was speech. So this is titled right speech. But you might decide to think about this as right communication, because nowadays we have phone calls, we have emails, we have text messages, social media posts, and a whole lot of other ways to communicate. So you should think about this as right communication. And now that we're moving into this moral conduct section, also keep in mind that this is guidance to understand the natural law of karma. These aren't rules, these aren't commandments. This is helping you to understand the types of harm that you could potentially cause through your speech, your actions, and your livelihood. And by you learning this wisdom, now you can make wiser decisions. Because even with the best intentions that you probably feel that you haven't necessarily had right intention, which is what the Buddha taught. And you haven't necessarily had right speech or right action because you haven't fully understood this natural law of karma, of cause and effect. So that's what he's explaining to you here in the Eightfold Path and all of his other teachings. Here, what he says in the Eightfold Path is, in what, monks, is right speech? Refraining from lying, refraining from slander, refraining from harsh speech, refraining from frivolous speech. This is called right speech. So this is a certain level of detail that the Buddha is sharing. And what you would like to do is understand each facet, all of these 4 aspects of right speech, so that you can bring your practice up to that and meet this kind of first layer of understanding of the natural law of karma. Because we understand that if we lie, then the mind's going to be overactive and obsessively trying to think about what you said to one person versus what you said to another person. And this isn't going to promote a peaceful and joyful mind with the mind being overactive. You're also going to find that in your personal and professional relationships, people are going to have trouble trusting you and depending on you because of the lies. They're going to discover these lies. So you'll reside in the world more peacefully, more harmoniously, and more joyful when you're not lying. If you're slandering, which is also like gossip, where you're damaging the reputation of other people through sharing things, whether they're true or whether they're untrue, when you're degrading and disparaging others through your speech, it's going to cause harm to those people and harm's going to come to you. Whoever you're talking to with slander or gossip, those people are probably going to go out and slander and gossip you too, because you get in the habit of slandering and gossiping people. They get in the habit of hearing that, and now they go out and gossip and slander you. Harsh speech is all about your tone, your tempo, and your word choice, how you choose to speak. If your tone, your tempo, or your word choice is harsh or aggressive or bitter, then people get accustomed to you speaking that way, and they're going to end up speaking with you that way. So by you cleaning this up, you'll find that your personal and professional relationships will blossom. You'll find more opportunities in life. Refraining from frivolous speech. What frivolous speech is just kind of like yada, 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 kind of unpurposeful, unbeneficial speech. Some people might call it idle chatter. This is where the mind has a certain craving in the mind. And because of that longing and yearning to just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, whoever you're talking to, it's causing harm in their mind. They might be like, oh my goodness, when is this person going to stop talking? So if you've ever been that person, or you've ever been on the receiving end of that, you know what that feels like, and you're not interested in doing that. So you can bring your practice up to right speech by practicing these 4 aspects, where you're not lying, you're not slandering, you're not having harsh speech, and you're not having frivolous speech or idle chatter. But then you'd like to look at other teachings that the Buddha has around right speech that plug into this. Because remember, I mentioned how the Eightfold Path is this core central teaching that allows you to understand all the other teachings. It plugs in. So this 5 factors of well-spoken speech plug into the Eightfold Path and help you to further understand what is right speech and how to practice it. So once you bring your practice up to the 4 aspects that are described in right speech as part of the Eightfold Path, then you'd like to go deeper and look at the 5 factors of well-spoken speech and see what he teaches there. And I cover all of this in chapter 5 in detail, but let me just share some of this with you now. To understand proper time and speaking at the proper time, this is where you're not interrupting people. This is where you ensure that your mind is not discontent, where you're not having anger and irritation and annoyance or frustration before you speak. Because if you speak with a mind that has discontentedness, all that's going to come out is unwholesome speech, unwise speech, because you're speaking through that anger, that hostility, that bitterness. And then the third aspect of speaking at the proper time is to know the mind of the other person that you're speaking to. If you have something very impactful or very significant to talk to somebody about, you'd like to be sure that their mind is prepared to talk about that. So if they're just coming home from work and you jump on them about, hey, we didn't pay our rent, we got a notice that we're going to be kicked out in 3 days if we don't pay the rent. That's the wrong time to be speaking with this person about something so impactful. You might decide to let them come in, put their bags down, take off their jacket, get some water, get some food, relax for 15, 20, 30 minutes, an hour. And then you might say, hey, is this a good time to talk about something that's important? Because you don't necessarily know how their day went. So whether it's your boss, your coworkers, your life partner, other people in your life, it's really helpful to know the other person's mind, particularly if you have something very significant or impactful to discuss. So if you're choosing not to interrupt people, you're choosing to speak only when your mind is calm and peaceful, and you're ensuring that the other person's mind is ready to discuss any particular topic, you'll have the most ability to have a successful conversation here. The next part is something we already discussed here, which is speaking the truth. Because if you're not speaking the truth, you're not going to be dependable and reliable. And those other things are going to be happening too, where your mind is overactive and having challenges to figure out what you said to one person or another. Speaking gently, we spoke about that as well. This is your tone, your tempo, and your word choice. Paying very close attention to that as you're speaking. And you might need to slow down a bit. If you tend to speak very fast, you might need to slow your mind down by restraining it and using some of the other teachings that you're going to learn about in the mental discipline. Because if you can restrain the mind and speak with gentle speech, then your tone, your tempo, and your word choice, it'll be more well received when you're sharing any particular kind of conversation with somebody as you're speaking through an email or a text message or what have you. If you're using gentle speech, it'll be better received. It'll be more influential speech. Then the fourth aspect is speaking beneficially. This is ensuring that what you say has a purpose, that there isn't frivolous speech or idle chatter, and you're not just speaking through craving, through desire, where you're just longing and yearning to talk, but instead what you're sharing has benefit to other people, not just you. And then the fifth aspect of this is speaking with a mind of loving kindness. The opposite of this would be speaking with a mind of inner hate, this frustration, this irritation, this annoyance. If the mind has a mind of loving kindness and you're speaking through that, then you have the best opportunity for this conversation to go well. So the proper time, you speak true, gentle, beneficial, and with a mind of loving kindness. This is what the Buddha is sharing about this natural law of karma, that these are the criteria or the guidance that is going to help guide you in the best ways to interact with others. As you train in right speech, you're going to have a certain personality, a certain character, and that's going to be unique to you. Every enlightened being is going to have a different character. They're going to have a different personality. They're going to joke. They're going to laugh. They're going to have fun. they're going to have a lot more fun than in the unenlightened state. Because in the unenlightened state, there's this frustration, sadness, this misery, this despair. But an enlightened mind isn't experiencing that. The mind is just always joyful, this unconditioned joy, this unconditioned happiness. So you can speak this way, and you'll see that your personal and professional relationships will blossom. And remember, you're learning, you're reflecting, and you're practicing. So now that you've learned, you can actually reflect on this, and you can look at conversations that didn't go well for you, that ended up in perhaps hostility or aggression on your part or the other person's part, and you can see that either you and or the other person wasn't using these 5 factors. Even if you or the other person was missing just one of these 5 factors, there's the potential for this relationship and the conversation in the relationship to not go well. So you're not interested in continuously breaking relationships. You're interested in having long-term relationships that can be fulfilling. So if you look at the relationships and the conversations that you've had in the past where you and or the other person weren't using these, you can see in each individual situation, you and or the other person wasn't using these. And this can confirm for you that what the Buddha is sharing is the truth. And then likewise, you can look at areas where conversations went really, really well. Even though you and or the other person didn't know these 5 factors, you guys might have been using them without being aware of it. And your conversations went really, really well. And that's why, because you guys were using these 5 factors without realizing it. So now you're intentionally learning and cultivating the wisdom around these 5 factors so that you can intentionally use these 5 factors in all situations. Initially, when you first start training the mind this way, it can be a challenge. It can be a struggle. It can be quite difficult in some situations, particularly where you have craving, desire, attachment in relationships. You'll find it a challenge to speak in this way. But in relationships where you don't have craving, desire, attachment, you'll find that it's much easier for you to speak in this way in those conversations and in those relationships. But what you would like to do is dial your practice in more and more. After you've learned the teachings, you reflected on them and see the truth, and then you start practicing, you can bring your practice up to this more and more and see the results for yourself that it works, where your personal and professional relationships blossom and your mind becomes more peaceful and joyful because you know you're functioning in a wise and wholesome way that doesn't lead to any harm through your speech or any communication. In Volume 1, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment, I share a whole lot of details around speech because it's a way that we can harm very easily through our communication. So you're going to see a lot of detail about right speech. And here is just a little bit of that detail, but I definitely suggest that if you haven't downloaded that book, that you download it and read all the detail about right speech and all the other steps of the Eightfold Path and all the other chapters. You can also take that book and you can go print it, or you can order printed copies or Kindle versions on Amazon. So this book is going to be very helpful for you to build up your wisdom around the teachings. The next step is right action. Right action is all about our bodily actions and how we choose to interact in the world through our bodily actions. And if we're causing harm through our bodily actions, then harm is going to come to us. So here the Buddha gives 3 really significant ways that we can cause harm through our bodily actions. He says, in what, monks, is right action? Refraining from taking life, refraining from taking what is not given, refraining from sexual misconduct. This is called right action. So here he's giving you 3 major aspects of ways you can cause harm through your bodily conduct and your actions. With the 5 precepts, which plugs into the Eightfold Path, he gives you a lot more details on this. He expands and opens this up for you and helps you get a lot more clarity around each one of these 3 aspects of right action. He didn't say in right action to don't drag your suitcase down the aisle of a plane and run over people's feet and hit their knees, because planes didn't exist during that time, right? So we can understand through right action that if we cause bodily harm through our bodily actions, then we're going to experience unwholesome results. So we can know not to drag our suitcase down the aisle and bump into people. You notice that the Buddha didn't say, don't walk up to somebody and punch them in the face. Well, he doesn't say that because he understands that he's sharing these three significant aspects of right action, helping you understand that bodily actions do cause harm, and it would be wise for you to not cause harm through your bodily actions. And then through these three that you investigate in the 5 precepts, and through you being wise and conscious and intentionally making decisions about your bodily actions, you ensure that you're not causing harm to anybody through your bodily actions. Because if you cause harm through your bodily actions, that harm will come back to you. I'm going to focus in on just one aspect of this for now. And then 2 weeks from now, in chapter 7, we're going to be exploring the 5 precepts. And in there, we're going to be exploring in detail each individual one of these and others as well. But just a heads up, the refraining from sexual misconduct, this doesn't include same-gender relationships. Sometimes people are taught that same-gender relationships are harmful or that is sexual misconduct. But if you understand the natural law of karma, of cause and effect, that when you cause harm to others, harm is going to come to you, you can then ask yourself, if 2 loving, consenting adults are choosing to be in a sexual relationship with each other, who are they harming? The answer is they're not harming anybody. If they're male and a female having sex, they're not harming anybody. They're 2 loyal, loving, consenting adults. If it's 2 males or if it's 2 females, they're not harming anybody because they're 2 loyal, loving, consenting adults. The Buddha understood this 2,500 years ago. So when you read his teachings on sexual misconduct, which he goes into a lot of detail about, you'll see that he doesn't include same-gender relationships. And he was familiar with them because he talks about it in his teachings. He talks about men who don't identify with masculine qualities and females who don't identify with feminine qualities. But he just makes this observation and then he doesn't teach anything about it. He just makes the observation, shares this with his students so that they would be aware of it. And if you understand the universal truth of impermanence, which I've taught throughout this program at different times, including today, then you understand that it's not possible for every male to be interested in having sex with a female. If that was true, then the universal truth of impermanence wouldn't be a universal truth, because every man would be interested in having sex with a female. That's not possible. That would be permanence. So the universal truth of impermanence tells us that not every man is going to be interested in having sex with a female, and not every female is going to be interested in having sex with a male. So that will help you to understand sexual misconduct and what the Buddha taught here, that it doesn't include same-gender relationships. So if you're in a same-gender relationship or you prefer same-gender relationships or you have people around you, there's nothing wrong. There's no harm in this. There's no harm that's going to come to these individuals as a result of their relationship. What the Buddha teaches as sexual misconduct is where we cause harm, like sex without consent, or if we're in an existing relationship and we have sex outside of that relationship, things like this, sex with minors and things like that. So you'll see that when we explore the 5 precepts where he explains it in detail. There's other aspects of right action, as I mentioned, because he doesn't explain it fully in the Eightfold Path, but he has other teachings where he explains right action and certain actions that can cause harm, like taking substances that cause heedlessness or gambling or things like this. You can see how when you do these things, you're causing harm. Whereas if you were taking substances that cause heedlessness, the mind is going to be unattentive, unalert, unaware. And if you're trying to purify your mind and make wise decisions that lead to wholesome results, you wouldn't be able to do that as long as your mind was unattentive, unalert, and unmindful. If you were gambling and using certain financial resources to try to win, more money, this is craving, this is desire. And the mind is oftentimes going to experience where you keep betting more and more, and then you're losing more and more, and you don't have the money to be able to sustain your life. So there's these types of actions and others that will lead to harm that are part of right action. And even, like I mentioned, taking a suitcase down the aisle of a plane can cause harm. So therefore, you would be interested in purifying your bodily actions where you're not causing harm through your bodily actions. Then there's right livelihood. Right livelihood is all about how you choose to sustain your life. If you choose to sustain your life based on harming others, then this harm is going to come to you. So in the Eightfold Path, the Buddha shares this. He says, "And what, monks, is right livelihood? Here, monks, the noble disciple, having given up wrong livelihood, keeps himself by right livelihood." So here is just a very general teaching because he's pointing to teachings that he shares at other times that describes right livelihood. And he's got about 3 or 4 different teachings where he goes into a lot of detail about right livelihood. If you would like to purify the first aspect of your livelihood or how you choose to sustain your life in the world, you would ensure that you're not practicing any of these 5. If you have business and weapons, business and living beings, business and meat, business and substances that cause heedlessness, or business and poisons, then you're going to be causing harm, and this harm will come back to you. You can look at this and reflect on this and see the truth for yourself. That if you, for example, let's just take one, the business and substances that cause heedlessness. If we stood on the street corner and we sold cocaine or heroin or methamphetamine or something like this, we have a very good likelihood of getting beat up, getting robbed, getting murdered, getting arrested. We could get addicted to those substances ourselves. And those are substances that we're causing harm in the community. So therefore, this harm is coming to us. Now, keep in mind that the teachings of the Buddha are the natural law of karma, which is a much higher law than the laws of society. Because the laws of society pretty much share across the world, although there's some places that it's not true because of impermanence, but a large majority of the world has outlawed things like cocaine or heroin or methamphetamine and things like this. But there might be something like alcohol that is legal. And it might be legal for you by human law to work at a liquor store, for example. However, these are places that oftentimes get robbed, people get beat up, people get murdered by just working as a cashier at a liquor store. And that's because of the natural law of karma. These are places that people tend to go in order to rob and steal from. So if you choose a livelihood that's based on any of these 5, which you can independently reflect on and see for yourself, that it would be unwise for you to do any of these because certain harms can come to you by choosing to work in any of these livelihoods. So you can purify the first aspect of your livelihood by eliminating these from your practice. If you're looking to move to a new job, or you're out of a job now, you're unemployed and you're looking to get a new job, I would direct you to volume 12, chapter 14. And there, the Buddha explains in detail right livelihood and helps you to understand all the various facets of your livelihood and how to ensure that your livelihood's purified. Because he shares a lot of other teachings, and here's just one more to be able to help you understand more about right livelihood. Here, he describes that scheming, flattery, hinting, belittling, pursuing gain with gain is wrong livelihood. This is how you choose to conduct your livelihood. The first teaching is your type of livelihood, but this is how you choose to conduct your livelihood. So if I was a politician, for example, which doesn't meet one of those 5 wrong livelihoods, but if I was corrupt or I was scheming, this would cause me reputational problems, and I could potentially cause harm through this, which is going to then cause harm to me that I might be out of a job, or I might find it difficult to perform my job. Or if I was a police officer and I was accepting bribes or something like this, that's scheming or corruption. And this is going to cause harm, so therefore you will find that you will have difficulties in your livelihood. What flattery is where you have insincere comments, where you're complimenting maybe your customers or your business partners or things like this, just as a way to conduct business with them. And they're going to see through those insincere comments. Hinting is to be unclear about certain things that you're talking about. So if I was on a project team at work and I was commenting about another employee and kind of innuendo or kind of degrading, like, yeah, Ralph was supposed to take care of that, but he obviously didn't get to it. This is kind of hinting around. and it's going to cause difficulties in our livelihood, where we could easily say, oh yeah, Ralph was planning to get to that, but unfortunately he didn't have an opportunity to handle that this week. So as far as I understand, he's going to take care of that on Monday. This is much more direct, much more clear, more supportive, more encouraging. It's not trying to degrade or diminish Ralph, for example, which is the next one, which is if we belittle our coworkers or we belittle our competition as part of our livelihood, this is going to look really bad on us. So we shouldn't be interested in belittling our competition or our coworkers. And because of that, if somebody did belittle, they're going to find that it's more challenging to conduct their livelihood and be successful at it. Then there's this pursuing gain with gain. What this is pursuing a job just for profit. If you're pursuing a job just for profit, just to collect a paycheck, you're not truly interested in doing this work. You're just there for a paycheck. Your life's going to feel quite mundane, quite boring, and you're probably going to not feel this peacefulness and this joy. Sure, you're going to be collecting a paycheck, but you're not going to feel fulfilled and enthusiastic and motivated in your job. Because essentially, by the time you purify your livelihood, the way that the Buddha describes in volume 12, chapter 14, is you will have found a livelihood that you would be comfortable doing for the rest of your life if you could. And it's at the point where if you could go through life without collecting a paycheck from this job, you would still do the work. That you're so motivated, you're so enthusiastic about this job and the work that you're doing on a daily basis that you would do it even without a paycheck. That's what it means to get to a right livelihood. Of course, you're going to need a certain income in order to sustain your life. But if you are so enthusiastic and motivated about your work and you enjoy it that much, that means that your livelihood may already be purified, that you don't even need a paycheck and you would still do this livelihood. You enjoy it that much. And if that's where you're at in life, wonderful. But if you're at a livelihood where you don't like the boss, you have difficulties with your coworkers, you're unmotivated about the work, you really don't believe in the product or services that you're selling and all these other kinds of things, you're going to feel very unmotivated and unenthusiastic. You're not going to have initiative and your life is going to feel very mundane. So you can purify your livelihood and get to the point where you have this zest and this interest and this motivation and encouragement to go forward and provide this product or service in the world. And you would even be willing to do that without a paycheck if you could, but knowing that you need to collect some type of income to be able to sustain your life. So this rounds out our livelihood as well as the entire moral conduct section. The right speech is all about not causing harm through your verbal communication, your text messaging, your chats, your posts, your emails. All communication should be harmless, practicing the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. Your bodily actions should also be purified in that you're not causing harm through your bodily conduct, that your bodily conduct and your bodily actions should be harmless. And then you're choosing to practice a certain livelihood to sustain your life where you're not causing harm to others. Because as long as you're causing harm in order to sustain your life, then this harm is going to come back to you. So let me see what questions that you guys have around the moral conduct, and then we're going to move into the mental discipline, which the Buddha explains how to train your mind and actively ensure that you develop this control and discipline of the mind. So you can put your questions into the YouTube or into Zoom, and I can answer your questions, or you can raise your hand electronically in Zoom, and I can answer your questions there. So it looks like Joe raised his hand. If you'd like to go ahead, Joe, I'll take your question.
Hi. I have kids, and so I tell them to do things several times in a row, and usually my voice starts kind of like right now, and then, it slowly volume goes up slightly. They continue, I guess, not to listen. And I understand you're not supposed to, you shouldn't yell or raise your voice too much, or it becomes, the norm. But if they were supposed to clean the room and they just don't do it, do you just, chalk it up to, sort of that's their karma, and, they'll just deal with their dirty room, or do you just keep talking to them in a normal voice? I guess my question is, how do you communicate this without raising your voice to someone like a child?
Sure. So with your children, they're quite young. I remember they're like 5 and 4 years old, if I remember correctly. So you're going to need to say things to them multiple times in order for them to understand and for them to be able to practice certain wise decisions. As a parent, your job is to impart wisdom and help them make wise decisions. You're helping to restrain them from evil, where you're going to need to teach them certain things. Where somebody else, like your neighbor who's an adult, your role isn't to teach them things. You're just having a neighborly relationship. But with your children, you're going to need to guide them. And this is going to need for you, of course, to be patient and be able to restrain your mind. But raising your voice isn't necessarily what you would like to do, particularly in this age with them being young, because they're just going to eventually get numb to that and they're going to tune it out. What you would like to do is sit down with them and guide them and teach them how by making wise decisions, they will experience wholesome outcomes. And when they make unwise decisions, they're going to experience unwholesome outcomes. You can introduce them to this natural law of karma, of cause and effect, and help them understand that when they listen to their parents and they do the things that you're asking them to do, this is wise decisions. Because as a parent, you can help them to understand that you would only be interested in wonderful things happening for them. And you would never ask them to do anything that would be problematic or harmful or cause them any kind of harm. And that you're interested in seeing things go well for them. And help them understand that there's an enormous amount of wisdom that they're going to need to accumulate over the course of their life. And your responsibility is to help them learn that wisdom, that at 5 years old and 4 years old, even at 12 years old and 16 years old, and even in their 20s, if you develop this lifestyle and this culture in your home where they understand that you're helping them learn wisdom and that you would like to guide them in making wise decisions, then they will be able to see more and more that that's what you're doing. And then you still have consequences, right? You can make consequences. You're not interested in punishing them, but instead helping them see their consequences. So when you ask them something and they do it, that's where you'd like to high five, rub them on the head, give them a hug, give them a kiss, and then spread that stuff out. You're not interested in doing that every single time. And then occasionally you might get them a piece of chocolate. If you have a bag of chocolate somewhere in your house that they do something really impactful and they listen to you and it's really helpful, you have this little grab bag that you can go to and you can say, you know what? I don't know your son's name. I think it's Benjamin, right? It's Benjamin. Benjamin, Dad asked you to clean your room about 2 hours ago and you took your time and cleaned your room. This is outstanding. I'm really pleased to see that you did that. And because you made such a wise decision, I would like to give you this piece of chocolate, right? So you're showing him that his wise decisions are leading to certain results. And with this age of a child, you may even need to help them and show them how to clean their room. They may not know at this age. So you're going to have to go in there, roll up your sleeves, get involved with them and do these kind of things. As you go and as they age, there may be certain times where you need to increase your tone, your tempo, and maybe adjust your word choices a little bit to show how serious you are. But you're never interested in doing that through harshness, through anger, through frustration. It should still come from a calm mind. And there's ways to increase your tone and your tempo so they know that you're serious, but it's still not harsh speech. You're still speaking gently. And I can give you some examples of that. If you would like to talk privately, we can discuss that. And there's another class that I taught a few months ago, which is guiding children on the path to enlightenment. If you haven't seen that already, that would be a really good class for you to watch on our YouTube channel. And if you have any issues finding that because it's part of the retreat series, just let me know and I'll send you the link, because you would like to understand that first and this Eightfold Path as well, and then get some customized guidance as you're having various challenges with your children so that you can learn how to guide them. Because the more you guide them through the Eightfold Path in the natural law of Karma, the better results you will experience, and it'll be more and more effortless for you. But initially, it's quite challenging to teach them these teachings. So the more that you learn them and then share the wisdom with them, ultimately, by the time they're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, life will be so much easier. But at the beginning like this, it'll be a bit challenging as you work with them and you help them learn the natural law of Karma. But slowly but surely, they can accomplish that. But you're still going to need to do things many, many times before they absolutely get it.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
I did have one more question, if that's okay.
Oh, sure. Go for it.
Yeah. It was about right livelihood. And the Buddha was saying something about business and poisons. Is that like a thing of that era, or would that translate to today, I guess, since it's separate from, drugs and such?
Yeah, poisons are like pesticides or any substance that's meant to kill another being. So we have pesticides, we have other chemicals that are meant to kill. And if we have a livelihood where we're basing our livelihood off of killing other beings using these poisons or selling these poisons, then we're basing our life off of killing and selling products that do kill. And he taught that this would be unwise for us to do that. And we can see the results of that because we've been using these pesticides and various chemicals in our environment for a really long time, and it's drastically impacted our environment. So that's the interesting thing about the teachings of the Buddha, is that he didn't always explain what the results would be. He explained what the teachings are, and now 2,500 years later, we can see the results of humanity having not practiced what it is that he taught.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you for your question, Joe. If there's anyone else who has a question, either in YouTube or on Zoom, you're welcome to raise your hand or submit your question through the comment section of YouTube. I'm going to move forward into the mental discipline because I'm not seeing any other questions at this time. So we're going to move into speaking about right action, right mindfulness, and right concentration. I'm going to read the words of the Buddha to you. Then I'm going to break this down and explain it to you in detail of what this teaching is and how to practice it using examples. So here the Buddha says, "And what, monks, is right effort? Here, monks, a monk rouses his will, makes an effort, stirs up energy, exerts his mind, and strives to prevent the arising of unarisen, evil, unwholesome mental states. He rouses his will, makes an effort, stirs up energy, exerts his mind, and strives to overcome evil, unwholesome mental states that have arisen. He rouses his will, makes an effort, stirs up energy, exerts his mind, and strives to produce unarisen, wholesome mental states. He rouses his will, makes an effort, stirs up energy, exerts his mind, and strives to maintain wholesome mental states that have arisen, not to let them fade away, to bring them to greater growth, to the full perfection of development. This is called right effort." So here the Buddha is explaining 4 aspects of right effort. And I'm going to break this down for you so that you can see what he is sharing around right effort. And then I'm going to share some examples with you so that you can see how one might choose to practice this. The examples are just examples that I've created, but your specific things that you're going to need to apply right effort to are unique to you. But the 4 aspects of right effort is something that every being who's interested in getting to enlightenment based on the teachings of the Buddha would need to understand and practice. So the first one, he's talking about preventing unwholesome mental states that have not arisen from arising in the mind. So an example of this is like killing a human being. You probably are not seriously thinking about killing another human being. That is not anywhere remotely in the mind at all. So what the Buddha is saying here is apply the right effort to prevent unwholesome mental states from coming into the mind. So this unwholesome mental state of being interested to kill another human being is not currently in your mind. So apply the effort to prevent that from ever coming in the mind. And there's going to be others as well. Perhaps there's certain things that are unwholesome that you're going to learn about on this path that aren't currently in your mind. And you would like to apply the effort to prevent those from ever coming into the mind. Number 2 is abandon unwholesome mental states that have arisen in the mind. So get those unwholesome mental states that are currently in the mind, apply the effort and get them out of the mind. Here's just some examples that you may have encountered at different times. If you are in a current relationship and you have a craving for sexual contact outside of that relationship, and you've seen that craving come up in the mind, the Buddha is saying apply the effort to abandon that unwholesome mental state, because you've learned that this is going to cause difficulties in your life if you go outside of your relationship and have a sexual contact outside of your relationship. People have been beat up for this, people have been murdered for this, people have lost their jobs because of this. So you're interested in abandoning that unwholesome mental state, because as long as you allow any unwholesome mental states to exist in the mind, then the mind is more likely to act upon them. Also, something like anger or frustration or irritation, where you see these unwholesome mental states coming up into the mind, you would like to apply the effort to cut those off and let them go. Abandon them out of the mind. Let them go, because it's an unwholesome mental state and you need to cut it out and let it go. Then there's produce unarisen wholesome mental states to arise in the mind. So as you're learning this path, you're going to learn certain wholesome mental states that are not yet in the mind. And the Buddha's saying, apply the right effort to bring those mental states into the mind, cultivate the mind, and produce these wholesome mental states that are not yet in the mind. An example of that might be generosity or compassion. You're going to learn as part of this path that practicing generosity is a wholesome mental state, and you're going to need to practice generosity in order to get to enlightenment. You're going to need to have giving and sharing of your time, effort, energy, and resources more than is strictly required in any given situation. And practicing generosity is going to help you eliminate craving, desire, attachment, train the mind to let go. Because craving, desire, attachment tends to promote a selfish mind. So where you see that your mind is not yet generous, for example, and you have difficulties sharing, then you apply the right effort to bring this into the mind and cultivate this in the mind so that your mind is more and more willing to share your time, effort, energy, and resources. Compassion is another one. Compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. It's the opposite of indifference, where you would be indifferent about the suffering or difficulties or the unfortunate circumstances that other people are in. But if you have compassion, you have the concern for the misfortune of others. You're not worried about them, because that would be discontentedness, but you have concern for them. This is the compassion. So if you know that you're not a very compassionate person, that you're very indifferent about other people's unfortunate situations, you would like to apply the right effort to produce this wholesome quality in the mind, for example. And then the last one that's part of right effort is to maintain wholesome mental states that have arisen, not allowing them to fade away, and work to increase their growth in the mind. So this is any wholesome mental states that are currently in the mind. You would like to support them, encourage them, don't allow them to fade. Bring them to full growth and full perfection. Some examples might be loving kindness and sympathetic joy. Loving kindness is the opposite of anger, hatred, and ill will. So if you know that your mind currently does have a certain amount of loving kindness, this genuine interest in seeing others be well, then you would like to support that, encourage it, don't allow it to fade. Continue to practice that loving kindness in situations where you're able to practice loving kindness. Sympathetic joy is the opposite of jealousy. Sympathetic joy is having joy for others' success, even if you didn't contribute to it. So where you see that your mind has sympathetic joy, where you are joyful for others' success, then you would like to support that, encourage it, bring it to full growth and full perfection, not allowing it to fade. So these are just examples that I'm using. Your unwholesome qualities that you need to prevent from coming into the mind and that you need to eliminate are unique to you. the wholesome qualities that you need to bring into the mind and the wholesome qualities that you need to support and encourage and not allow to fade, those are going to be unique to you. But here on this step of right effort, you can understand that it's applying the effort to eliminate the unwholesome and prevent it from coming into the mind, and to cultivate and support and grow the wholesome. That's what right effort is all about. Now let's talk about right mindfulness, because you wouldn't be able to practice right effort without right mindfulness. These go hand in hand together. In fact, the entire mental discipline section of the Eightfold Path goes hand in hand together, just like the other steps of right speech, right action, right livelihood. These all go together as well. Here I'm going to read the words of the Buddha, and then I'm going to break it down for you and explain to you what right mindfulness is. He shares, "In what, monks, is right mindfulness? Here, monks, a monk resides, reflecting on body as body, dedicated, clearly aware and mindful, having put aside craving and worry for the world. He resides, reflecting on feelings as feelings, dedicated, clearly aware and mindful, having put aside craving and worry for the world. He resides, reflecting on mind as mind, dedicated, clearly aware and mindful, having put aside craving and worry for the world. He resides, reflecting on mental objects as mental objects, dedicated, clearly aware and mindful, having put aside craving and worry for the world. This is called right mindfulness." So here the Buddha is talking about 4 aspects of right mindfulness: body as body, feelings as feelings, mind as mind, mental objects as mental objects. So I'm going to explain this to you of what he's describing so that you can understand it, then you can reflect on it, and then you can actually practice it. In general, if you're just starting out with the path to enlightenment, you might think about right mindfulness as awareness of mind. This is the very beginning understanding of mindfulness, and it will help promote what you need in the mind, which is this quality of mindfulness, where you can have awareness of the mind. Because if you're going to purify the mind and apply something like right effort, where you're eliminating certain unwholesome qualities and you're arising certain wholesome qualities, you're going to need awareness of mind. Without awareness of mind, you wouldn't be able to apply right effort, and you wouldn't be able to apply even some of the moral conduct and the other teachings as well. So you're going to need awareness of mind. This is right mindfulness, but more specifically, it's the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Nowadays, people use the word mindfulness in common language, but they're typically not using that word in the same way that the Buddha used it. The way that I hear a lot of people using it is they might say, "Can you mindfully carry this glass of water to that table?" And what they're essentially saying is, can you carefully carry this glass of water to the table? It's not mindfulness, it's careful. So even though other people might use the word mindful instead of careful, it's important that you understand the word mindful in the way that the Buddha used it, and that you use it in that way, and you think about it that way, and you practice it in that way, which is awareness of mind. You're going to need to have full awareness of your mind, and gradually, as you practice breathing mindfulness meditation and other things, you're going to get more and more awareness of the mind, being able to observe these unwholesome qualities and these wholesome qualities. Then, as you develop your awareness of mind, you would like to develop the 4 foundations of mindfulness. This is where you start to understand the bodily sensations, the feelings, the condition of the mind, and mental objects. What the Buddha is essentially explaining to you is the life cycle that discontentedness goes through as it's arising in the mind. Before the mind experiences feelings of anger, there's going to be some bodily sensation. You may have been noticing this in the past already. You might have noticed certain tingling coming up in the body. You might have noticed pressure in the chest. You might have noticed heat in the face or pressure in the skull. These are all bodily sensations that are indicating to you that the mind is about to get feelings of anger or frustration or some other discontent feeling. Even pleasant feelings have certain bodily sensations. Even those neither painful nor pleasant, like shyness. You might get queasiness in the stomach. We call this butterflies in our stomach. there's some bodily sensation that is occurring. And if you don't observe that bodily sensation and cut it off and let it go there, then it's going to become a feeling in the mind. Now the mind's angry, and there's this feeling of anger in the mind. And this is where you might become unskillful in your intentions, your speech, and your actions. If you don't cut it off and let it go as a feeling, then it's going to affect the condition of your mind. Have you ever been angry for several hours or days or even a week or two? This is because you weren't aware of this process. You weren't aware of the bodily sensations. You weren't aware that it became a feeling in the mind. You weren't aware that it affects the condition of the mind. So now you were angry for a week or two. Some people have been angry for a year or two or longer over certain situations that have occurred. This is because the mind was just unaware, lacking the wisdom of these four foundations of mindfulness. And then through experience after experience after experience, where the mind wasn't aware of bodily sensations, it wasn't aware of the feelings, it wasn't aware that they were affecting the condition of the mind, with wrong view, we were probably blaming somebody else, then the mind forms these mental objects. This is like a container that is deeply rooted in the mind. And in this example, it would be ill will. That we experience certain things, we have these conditioned experiences, the mind arises these feelings of anger, then there's this condition of mind that is affected, and now we feed this mental object and we form this mental object of ill will. This is where we're bitter and harsh and aggressive because of this container, this mental object of ill will. When we're born, we don't have ill will. We don't go to the nursery at the hospital hating on other babies. We don't have that in the mind. It's through conditional experiences in various situations throughout our life that we experience these bodily sensations, these feelings, the condition of the mind was affected, and it feeds and establishes this mental object of ill will. And what you're doing on the path to enlightenment, among other things, is you're becoming aware of this process. So now with training of the mind, you can start cutting off and letting go of these discontent feelings as a bodily sensation. Realizing that it's going to take gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress to get proficient at it. But over time, you would like to get better and better at observing those bodily sensations and cutting them off and letting them go as a bodily sensation. Because you know that if you don't do that, it's going to become a feeling in the mind. Now the mind is polluted with anger, frustration, guilt, shame, fear, boredom, loneliness, or some other discontent feeling. Essentially, what you would like to do is like if you were taking a boat from America to England, you would like to prevent the water from ever coming into this boat. Because once you get out in the middle of the ocean and the water is coming into the boat, you've got a real problem to deal with. You've got to get this water out of the boat. But if you can prevent the water from ever coming into the boat, you'll have a much better journey. So that's what you're doing, is that when the feelings are starting to arise as just bodily sensations, and you can get more and more in tune with what these are. And if you're not aware of them now, start paying attention to your mind and the body, so that prior to these feelings arising in the mind, there's going to be some bodily sensation. And if you can train the mind to more and more easily cut that off and let it go, then you won't have these feelings of discontentedness coming into the mind. All the while you're working on these mental objects like ill will, we're using loving kindness meditation to break that up, almost like a jackhammer. You're like jackhammering this mental object to break that up, uproot it, and get it out of the mind, so that now the mind can be peaceful and joyful. And this is going to take time to gradually train the mind in this way. You're not suppressing the feelings. You're actually cutting them off before they ever become feelings in the mind. You're not repressing, you're not suppressing, because if you can cut them off at a bodily sensation, you're restraining the mind, you're pulling the mind back, because it's craving, desire, attachment that's causing these discontent feelings. And as long as you allow that craving, desire, attachment to go unchecked, it's going to continue to exist in the mind, and then you're going to continue to stay stuck in this cycle of repeated discontentedness. But if you can observe those bodily sensations and cut them off and let them go before the feeling ever comes into the mind, now you've saved yourself a whole lot of difficulties and troubles, because the mind won't get polluted with those discontent feelings. This is what the 4 foundations of mindfulness is, and this is how you practice it. Starting with awareness of mind and just practicing that. You're developing this through the next step, which is right concentration. You're developing this awareness of mind, but as you get that awareness of mind more and more, then start noticing this process of bodily sensations, feelings, condition of the mind, and these mental objects. Next, let's talk about right concentration. This is the last step on the Eightfold Path. In the Eightfold Path itself, the Buddha is describing the results of putting together all the various steps of the Eightfold Path and what you're going to experience having put together all these steps. These are called the jhanas. These are preliminary phases that the mind goes through before it reaches the first stage of enlightenment. There's 4 stages of enlightenment that the mind goes through. And once the mind is in the 4th stage of enlightenment, the mind is actually enlightened at that point, and you're no longer experiencing discontentedness. But leading up to that, there's still some discontentedness until you get to the 4th stage where the mind is actually enlightened. But prior to that first stage of enlightenment, there's these 4 preliminary phases that the mind goes through. These are called jhanas. And the Buddha describes them in detail here because it's helpful for you to understand what these are, because it's kind of like you're getting glimpses of what enlightenment is like for a few minutes or a few hours, a few days. You can experience these glimpses of what enlightenment is like when the mind is in the jhanas. And one of the things that's happening in the jhanas is not only are these certain qualities of mind arising, where you see more and more qualities that the Buddha is describing here, but you also see this oneness of mind, or this unification of the mind. When the mind is unenlightened and it's not in the jhanas, there's a conscious mind that you're fully aware of, and then there's a subconscious mind, which you don't really have much awareness of. This conscious mind and subconscious mind are both polluted. The subconscious mind is oftentimes even more polluted than the conscious mind. But by the time you've trained your mind enough on the Eightfold Path with all the various steps, you experience this oneness of mind, or this unification of the mind, where there's no longer a conscious mind and a subconscious mind. You now have full clarity and full visibility into the entire mind. And this is what you're going to need in order to get to enlightenment and fully purify the mind. So these are the results of having practiced all the other steps. In other parts of the Buddha's teachings, he explains what right concentration is. And I'm going to help you understand what right concentration is and how to practice it. Just know that here he's describing the results. So to understand how to actually practice right concentration and what it actually is to understand developing a daily meditation practice and practicing singleness of mind in daily life. Developing a daily meditation practice is to practice breathing mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditation. These are meditations that I taught as part of this program. There was a 4-part series on breathing mindfulness meditation and a 4-part series on loving kindness meditation. If you haven't learned that yet, you can go back and see the recordings and build up your practice where 2 or 3 times per day, you're working towards 30 minutes or more per session. It's going to take you time to build up to this. Everybody starts at a different place. You might be at 1 time for 10 minutes or 2 times for 15 minutes each. But gradually, you would like to build up to this. Some students, it takes 6 months, a year, or maybe even longer to build up to this. But you would gradually like to work towards the goal. Understanding that frequency is more important than the duration of time. So if you can get 2 sessions for 15 minutes each, that would be better than 1 session at 30 minutes. So work on building up your frequency of 2 to 3 sessions per day for 30 minutes or more. And you're going to need to gradually create more and more space in your life because you're working, you have children, you have other responsibilities. You're going to need to gradually build this up. You can't just snap your fingers and start meditating. So you're going to need to know breathing mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditation. These are the 2 priorities in terms of meditation. There's a couple other meditations that are taught on an as-needed basis. Not everybody's going to need those meditations, But in order to get to enlightenment, you would need to know breathing mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditation and build that practice up. It's going to help you cultivate the qualities that you need in order to address the mind and eliminate the pollutions of mind. And as I taught each one of those meditations, I explained what it is that you're cultivating as part of that meditation and what it is that you're eliminating as part of that meditation. So you'll see that when you learn from those teachings, or if you have learned from those teachings, you will know that I shared that with you. Then in addition to developing your meditation practice to practice right concentration, you would like to develop a practice of singleness of mind in daily life, where you're just doing one thing at a time. This will help you to produce focus, concentration, clarity of mind, and deep memory. You may have been taught to multitask, and this is very detrimental to the mind. The mind can't actually do more than one thing at a time. What the mind is doing is it's rapidly cycling from thing to thing to thing. You can do one thing for 3 seconds, another thing for 5 seconds, another thing for 10 seconds, and the mind is just rapidly cycling. And if you've been doing that for an extended period of time, you might find that your mind is quite overactive, that you feel somewhat stressed at certain periods. You might have anxiety. You might have difficulties concentrating in different parts of your life. And that's because you've been training your mind to rapidly cycle from thing to thing to thing to thing. Well, what you need to do in order to transform that is now train it to only focus on one thing at a time, practicing singleness of mind. Because if you're on the phone, you're watching TV, and you're eating food, it's impossible for you to be able to do all three of those things at one time. You're either talking on the phone, you're watching TV, or you're eating food. And when you're done with that conversation, you didn't really remember what you guys talked about because you weren't really that involved in it. And now the mind was doing all three things because you thought you were being more productive. But in reality, you might have damaged a relationship. You might need to go back and clean that up. You might need to go back and ask that person, what did you talk about? Is there something you promised to do that you didn't actually do? And this is causing all kinds of challenges in one's life. So by you practicing one thing at a time, you can have that phone call, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is. And then when you're done and you move on. You don't need to circle back and try to clean this up. So practicing singleness of mind in daily life is going to promote the focus and concentration, because you're going to find it very difficult to practice something like the 5 factors of well-spoken speech if you don't have concentration. If you don't have singleness of mind, it's going to be very challenging to bring the 5 factors and the wisdom of that into a conversation. But the more that you practice the way that the Buddha is teaching, it'll eventually get effortless. It'll be like first nature. You will have trained your mind very readily and very easily to do these practice where you're easily practicing this on a daily basis. Where you're first getting started, it can feel like a struggle. It can feel quite difficult. But where you feel that, you go forward and you address it, and then you throttle back a little bit. You go forward and you throttle back. Gradual practice leads to gradual progress. So this is right concentration. And just to understand the entire summary of the mental discipline is, with right effort, this is where you're taking the initiative to eliminate certain unwholesome aspects of the mind and cultivate certain wholesome qualities of the mind. You need to apply the effort to do that. And then the way that you do that is practicing right mindfulness, where you have awareness of the mind, practicing those 4 foundations of mindfulness, ultimately getting to that point. And then with right concentration, you practice meditation and you practice singleness of mind in daily life. This is what will bring the mind into the jhanas. This is those preliminary phases that the mind is experiencing before it reaches the first stage of enlightenment. And now when the mind is in the jhanas, you can start more readily focusing on eliminating the 10 fetters. And this is the mental discipline, where you're getting control and discipline of the mind. Because when the mind is sad and angry and frustrated, or any of those other conditioned feelings, you don't have control of the mind. You don't have discipline of the mind. That's why the mind is doing that. But as you gain this discipline, this control of the mind, your mind won't go up and down and up and down. The mind can be calm and peaceful and joyful all the time, because you've eliminated the conditions that are causing the mind to go up and down. And it's this training of wisdom, moral conduct, and mental discipline that's allowing you to be able to do that. So let me see what questions you guys have on the Eightfold Path. And you can put those into Zoom, you can put those into YouTube, and I'll be able to help you to answer any questions that you guys might have. Looks like we have some questions here in YouTube. I'm seeing one from Michael Jenkins. I'm not sure if this is a question or not, but let me read it. Great class today. Everything that you said was really helpful and so clear to me because I had so many of these experiences and see myself what you are discussing today, so I know it's true. Okay, great. It's wonderful that you're confirming those things. Looks like Tonka has a question here. It says, is it possible that some trauma has been stored in the body and needs to be released by experiencing some suppressed feelings? In that case, we wouldn't cut them off, would we? This isn't actually true, Tonka. The only way that one experiences anything is through the mind. Any trauma or any experiences that you've experienced, they're conditioned experiences in the mind. The mind is the boss, the body is the employee. There's nowhere in the body that you can store a conditioned experience. You can store the effects of it. So there can be tension in the muscles, or there can be pain in like the neck or the shoulders. This is a result of the mind being conflicted and having difficulties or stress or having any kind of traumatic experiences. The body is experiencing the stiffness because the mind is unwell. So by training the mind to be tranquil, the body will then be tranquil. But the storing of these conditioned experiences or this trauma is all in the actual mind. So anytime you experience the bodily sensations of discontentedness arising, you would like to cut those off and let them go. That's how you're going to train the mind to be restrained and to eliminate the craving, desire, attachments. As long as you allow the feelings to come into the mind is still experiencing conditioned feelings. It hasn't been trained to eliminate conditioned feelings and to stop basing its inner feelings on certain conditions. So you're putting this blockade in place so that the mind is no longer experiencing conditioned feelings. Sometimes when people hear this, they think that an enlightened being must be emotionless, right? Because you're no longer experiencing certain feelings. But remember, these are all conditioned feelings. An enlightened being is experiencing much better experiences than in the unenlightened state. Because in the unenlightened state, you go up, but you got to come back down. There's this up and down and up and down and up and down. The enlightened mind is beyond that. It is experiencing permanent peacefulness, permanent joy, this unconditioned happiness, if we'd like to call it that. It's just always happy, always joyful. If you've ever heard Thailand called the land of smiles, this is the reason why. Because it's so easy to smile when your mind knows the truth and your mind is no longer having those conditional experiences and those conditioned feelings. So an enlightened mind is going to be beyond the pleasure and pain because that's the up and down and up and down. And the way that you get to that is no longer allow the mind to experience conditioned feelings. So that bodily sensation is like a red light on the dashboard of your car telling you, hey, something's wrong here, so that you can cut that off and let it go before the mind experiences these conditioned feelings. Then it'll get out of the habit of continually experiencing conditioned feelings. I don't see any more questions in YouTube, and I don't see any in Zoom either, and I don't see any hands raised. So it doesn't look like you guys have any more questions on this content of the Eightfold Path. So what I'll do then is just share with you what we're going to be doing in next week's class. Because next week's class, we're going to be moving into Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is quite short. It's titled The Middle Way. Walking the Middle Way. This is a very simple teaching. It's probably only going to take me about maybe 30 minutes to actually teach it to you in class, and then I'll open up to any questions that you guys have. So now that we went through chapter 3, 4, and 5, which are quite meaty in nature, and you need to digest that, this is giving you just a little bit of content with chapter 6 to be able to sit with just that little bit of content, and then you can even refresh your memory and review and investigate chapter 3, 4, and 5 if you like, because you'd like to be sure that you go through chapters 3, 4, and 5 in a lot of detail, particularly chapters 4 and 5, because that's where you're getting the real meat of the path to enlightenment. Then chapter 7, which is 2 weeks from now, is the 5 precepts. We're going to go through a lot more detail there. In chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10, and 11, we're going to get right back into detail. So next week's class is going to be chapter 6, the middle way, walking the middle way. As you have questions on the Eightfold Path, you can use all those methods that I mentioned, which is asking questions in class, posting in the Facebook group, sending a private message, or scheduling a personal guidance session where we can meet in Zoom together. So those are the 4 ways that you can get help. Then on Wednesday, we're going to be in the second part of our 4-part series of Buddhist chanting. So if you'd like to join that, you'll be able to learn Buddhist chanting. We're also going to be doing meditation in each one of these as well. So on Wednesday, we're going to be refreshing everyone's memory on the Buddhist chants, and then we're going to use those Buddhist chants and go right into meditation. The Buddhist chanting, it's not mystical or magical thing. It's just to help ease the mind into meditation. So I taught last week about all the reasons why somebody might decide to develop a meditation practice that includes Buddhist chanting. So you can see that in the recordings if you like on Facebook, YouTube, or in the podcast. So thank you all for joining for today's class. I appreciate that you're dedicated and interested to learn the teachings of the Buddha. I appreciate the questions that you guys had to help further discuss the teachings and to investigate the teachings. So I'll see you in one of these future classes perhaps. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Sawadee krap.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.